So ultimately, how to review a paper and how not to review a paper. So this tweet is here. Someone tweeted this recently, and they just said, thank you to the reviewers. And this is what we want to be aiming for. We want to be reviewers. We want our reviews to be positive, to be helpful, and we want to be helpful to the people that we're reviewing for as well. So this is the aim when we submit our reviews, is to the kind of feedback that we'd want to get. So what is a review and why do we do them? Well, we are aiming to assess the work. We're looking for the quality of the work and how suitable it is for the publication in the journal that we're looking at. We ideally offer a new perspective and improvements on the work, and that's kind of the idea. Why do we do it? Because they're improving the science that other people are doing. We're fostering creativity, creating new science and improving the science. We're trying to remove scientific fraud, which most papers aren't. No one's trying to defraud the establishment of science, but it can happen. So we're there to spot that as well. And it's also just about kind of keeping the system getting better. So a review should be an opportunity for growth, both of the reviewer and the reviewee, a chance to formalize your thoughts on scientific documents, and an opportunity to foster better science. It should not be a chance to shut down or scoop rival work. It shouldn't be a personal attack on the authors. It shouldn't be a chance to just flex on other people and reject things for the sake of it. It shouldn't be a request for work or that's beyond the scope of a journal. And it shouldn't be a comment on work that you haven't actually attempted to read or understand. Unfortunately, all of these things have happened to people. And so we're also going out into the world trying to be better reviewers, and trying to make it a fairer system. So who can review a paper? Well, initially 2 or 3 established scientists are given the chance to review, and then they might do it themselves, and they might involve their postdocs or graduate students or any members of their lab. So people have already in this group I've been asked to review for Jake. Other people have been asked as well, because Jake likes to get people involved. But my old lab, I wasn't even mentioned as a thing. So it really depends on the supervisor. But I hope that when the people here go to supervise in the future, they also involve their students on it, because there's a lot to learn from doing reviews, and it's just an important part of the process. So how do we write a review in the first place? Well, there's this great guide. So Jess, I know you nearly finished your review, but this link here, which I'll also post in the channel afterwards, is incredibly good flowchart system for doing a review. So especially if it's your first review or you want a structure for it, then it's a great link. It's done by some of the editors in Nature. I think were involved in writing this guide, and it's just a step-by-step thing of what to do. I mentioned some of their ideas here and kind of how to go about it, but I really do recommend that you head for that if you're doing this for the first time, or maybe the 10th time, whatever it is. It's still worth a look. So in general, read the paper. You ideally want to go through it a few times. These are very, very general feedback. I'm going to get onto more of the steps, but use line numbers when you are talking about the feedback. It just helps people to find what you're actually talking about. And also don't be afraid for your comments to be about clarification. So sometimes you'll think, oh, this is wrong, but then sometimes you just want to know more. And the reality is that readers of papers are just like you guys. There's, this is what we're aiming to do, is improve that paper for the reader. And so any kind of comment, to a certain extent, once you've had a good go at reading it, is valid, especially at that stage when they haven't had any external feedback, so they haven't had the chance for anyone to come in. So this is a longer thing, so just feel free to take a second to look at these questions. But these are the ideas from the Nature's guide on how to review a paper, and these are key questions when you're going through a paper to be thinking about. Does the abstract and the introduction identify the need for research and the relevance? Does the methodology approach the questions correctly? appropriately? Are the results clear, logical, and justified? And do they, does the introduction fit the conclusions as well? Because some people's introductions, as great as they might be, won't necessarily fit the ideas that they're like coming to in the conclusions. They might not introduce the science properly. You can have like different sections to a review, but this is quite a common one to go through. So you want a summary of like a short summary of what you thought of the paper. Is it ready for publication or not? Then major revisions, so big things that need to change or be addressed or clarified to make sure that that the paper is rigorous. And then minor revisions are like incorrect labels or incorrect grammar, things that we want to see in the writing, but that you really shouldn't, that aren't some flaw in understanding or flaw in explanation. Cool. So this is where I'm going to now move on to the examples. And, ideally, like if I was going to redo the presentation, it would work well as like, what do you think is wrong with this? So I'll see, I don't know how much information I put on the slides, but if there is an opportunity to ask, like, what's good about this thing. So just to comment on this, like I've borrowed these comments from the Nature sites because they're now publishing their peer review reports. Obviously, Nature's at the better end of journals, so you're not going to see as and it's published papers that the peer reviews are reported for. So we're still kind of missing the rejected papers, like that part of this. So yeah, just bear that in mind when you're looking at these, because when we're coming at a place from learning about what the science is going on and everything, we know that negative results and unpublished papers, we just don't get to see them. So we're kind of blind to what's going on there. These just information, these are 3 papers that I use to pick things from. They're quite different, but they're all bio-related. And so the things that are mentioned will reference loop extrusion and DNA repair, or a model of evolutionary trajectories, or SARS-CoV-2. You don't need to have read the whole paper to get the ideas. So don't worry about you haven't read these papers, that's fine, because what I'm focusing on is like the ideas that reviewers come back to. And they're there so that you can look at them if you find the sentences or the references interesting. So here is an example, not from these papers, of an introductory or the summary of a review here. Does anyone think there's anything wrong with this? You haven't seen the paper?
I would love to get this review back.
Right. And the thing is, like, this is a good review if that's how you feel. Like, we don't, if ultimately it's unlikely that you'd find it being perfect. But if you can't find anything wrong with it, then, that's what you should be saying. Like, this could be the review that you have to write. And so just be prepared for that as well. Because this is as legitimate a review as any others.
I'm really happy you brought that up, Steph, because I think I'm just randomly commenting. Yeah, I think that there is like a temptation and a feeling as a reviewer to like, you have to find stuff wrong. But you don't. That's a really good point. Yeah. I'm really glad you opened with that.
So I have 2 points. To that point about, not necessarily having to find something wrong with the paper is good. It reminds me of this thing called bike shedding, which is this idea that was conceived of by some dude who gave this analogy. Imagine that there's...
what did you say it was called, Kyle?
Bike shedding. So bike is in bicycle and shed is in shed.
Okay.
So imagine that you have a committee that's put together to allocate funding for a nuclear power plant. So they have to allocate which funds go where and all of that. It's a really complicated task. So they spend most of their time figuring out how much they're going to allocate to the bike shed that they're going to put out in the front to store all the employees' bikes, because it's a much easier task to do than what they need to be doing. So in this case, I feel like a lot of people, they will pick up part of the paper because they don't really have anything substantive to say about it. And alternatively, they can be like, oh yeah, this is a fantastic paper. I don't really have anything to say, and just leave it at that. And then the second thing is that, what was I going to say? I forgot what my second thing was.
All right, if you think about it.
Oh no. With this example here, they say, I recommend publication as is. I've heard often that actually it's not good to put in your review whether you recommend the paper or not for publication, because it undercuts the editor.
That's a good point. I haven't heard that one.
So it's like, this is a great this is a great couple of sentences, but I would just remove, I recommend publication as is.
That's, yeah. So as to not annoy the editors who are the ultimate deciders of the fate of papers and whether it fits with their journal, and for whatever reason, they're ultimately the ones who are going to decide, and we're just providing them with advice. That's why this last sentence probably didn't rub anyone too much up the wrong way, but you never know with the editor, like, what they want. So, if you just evaluate the paper, then those conclusions about publication can kind of come from the editor themselves. Thank you, Carl. So this here, obviously it'll take a few, like, however long to read. I'm not sure how quickly people read, but this is the summary of a paper. And so there's something missing from this, because this was not the entire review. Okay, so can anyone see what's, like, if they've got more to say after this, what's missing from this summary?
It seems like this is discussing, the context of the paper and whether or not they think it's worthy of the journal and blah, blah, blah. But it's not talking about the actual experimental design and their assessment of such.
Yeah, and they also, as I said, this wasn't the entirety of the review. So if they've got any comments, on how to change it, they haven't addressed that here. And I think it's important to give, the negatives and the positives in this first part, because this is supposed to be a summary. It's a bit like if you did an abstract and you haven't kind of hit the key points. Like, this looks more like something written by that the authors would write, rather than someone who's coming back and trying to evaluate the paper. So yeah, this one, it was from the same paper here, and I've highlighted how they have commented on various aspects. So they have said it's a clever combination. They've addressed the good things about it, but they've also just addressed their concerns, because they did have things to say, and they've also just commented as well on the suitability of it for the journal itself, which is good to hear and worth commenting on, because yes, the editor will assess that, but you are, as a reviewer, like, that's part of your job as well, to think about, like, the journal and that it's in. It shows you're very aware of what journal you're reviewing for, because some people get lots of reviews for lots of different journals, and it's just good to root yourself in the journal that you're evaluating for, because that can change quite a lot, like the requirements. Yeah, so this is a reviewer that obviously understands as well that they know what kind of papers the journal usually gets and everything else by commenting. So these are comments from, so kind of going through now on, like, the kinds of comments that you get in reviews and examples of them. So these are from two of the these are different papers. So the first one's from the SARS-CoV paper, kind of obviously from the comment. The second one's from the models of the co-evolutionary paths. And you can see here, this is an example of when you're saying, okay, the introduction isn't like complete. Like there's key information here that's missing, or there's literature that's like around that you've kind of glossed over. So this is an example of the kind of comment you might think about making and that people do make all the time on papers.
What was the name of that Japanese from JTB guy? I don't know where the scientist is from. He amassed like thousands of citations.
The cite me.
JTB, yeah. It's JTB. I don't know which.
So it brings up an interesting point. I think some people are very clearly very comfortable asking for their own stuff to be cited.
Yeah.
Some people are not, and I think it's worth remembering something in that, you know, it's very important. One of the things we have to do as scientists is put the research into the context that's appropriate, right? It's one of the things you have to do for a PhD. It's one of the things we have to do all the time. For a couple of reasons. It also serves to allow the audience who might not be experts to get a more fair background. And, you know, the interesting bit is if you're really truly the appropriate reviewer, it's pretty likely that you've published in this realm as well. And so asking them to cite your stuff isn't always wrong, actually. Yeah. So, sometimes it is. If you're like, please see my Google Scholar page and cite everything.
Yeah, so there's a tweet I mentioned later in the how not to review, where the author's like, I went to this list of publications and I couldn't find a single one that's like relevant, because this person had just asked to be cited basically, and none of it seemed relevant to the work. Like, I think, you know, if you can suggest your own papers, you can suggest papers you know. If you're only focused on your own work, then it kind of shows that you're too narrow-minded. But yeah, suggesting that one citation by yours it might work is definitely not a problem. Don't be afraid to do that. But if you've listed 10 or can't list the actual one that's relevant, then that's probably a lot more of a problem. So yeah, these are both very valid, good examples of how to feedback on the background. So the other thing so these are kind of the sections of the paper that you could focus on when you're giving this feedback that relates to those questions earlier. And figures are a huge part of that. So figures the reader needs to be able to interpret the figure and understand it. So the reviewer's aim is to really, really, really get the figures. Like, that's a really big important part, because words are a little bit easier to see, you know, does it hit the mark or not? Does each sentence make sense? But graphical representations can be like just so hit and miss. And you really have an opportunity as a reviewer to improve the figures. And I think that's something that like is always worth thinking about. So for example, this first one, they've suggested, you know, a color scheme alteration, which is more of a minor thing, but they've also suggested that like more resolution or more bits are mapped in that one. Ideas on commenting on how suitable the figure is for the justification. So they've taken the supplementary figure here, and they've used that figure and they've expanded on that and saying, you know, does it support it? Then figure 2A is largely incomprehensible. So these are like 3 different types of comments on a figure. You know, is a figure complete enough? Is it clear enough? Is it convincing? Does it support what they're trying to say? Can you understand the figure in general? So these are all the kind of questions you'd want to be asking yourself about figures. So only one of the papers that I had a model that I looked at for this had a model in it. But like when you're looking at a model or statistics, you want to be, ideally so they have to pick the reviewers based, you know, they ideally pick a reviewer who can comment on this, so is established in this. So, you know, if it's not your area of expertise, like don't think you need to necessarily, you know, what you can do is basically you could suggest, I don't have expertise in this, I would recommend another reviewer, or I would recommend someone with more experience. So don't be afraid to state your limitations as well as the limitations of the paper.
That's a really good point. And remember the one we did as well. You can say, I'm going to comment on this bit.
Yes.
happy to review this bit, but not the other bit.
Exactly. So this person here in the model, they were just asked to review the model. So they're like, I'm going to look at the model, but I have no expertise in the rest of it. So this is my comment on the model. So that, they're able to dig into that and really reflect on that. So, if you're not an expert in it, don't be afraid to make a comment on clarity or whatever. Don't be afraid to say this doesn't seem to make sense. But please do suggest, someone with more expertise in this needs to look at it, because discussing your limitations is as important as discussing the paper's limitations. When we are looking and thinking about models, we want to be thinking about, the statistics, the maths, does it make sense? We also want to think about the rationale for the model. So, there's an example here of what's the rationale. If they haven't explained the rationale, they need to explain it. Doesn't mean the rationale isn't there, but they need to explain it. So that's another thing to think about as well. The one of the biggest comments, the sort of the most major comments as well that you'll often get on your own papers or make about others, it's just about the conclusions, the data supporting the conclusions, and that really is important, because when we overstate our conclusions in a paper, they're the things that get out of control. So this first comment is quite good because it's saying, it's suggesting extra experiments, which there's pros and cons to that. There's criticisms, don't ask for too many extra experiments, right? But the other option is they just tone down the paper, and that's kind of the advice you want them to give. You want to find a way for them to take what they have done and present that. You don't necessarily need to find 10 million more things that they need to do. Another thing is a common thing is just alternative interpretations. So that's what the second comment on is, just saying the data isn't sufficient for your conclusions, and that's such a common comment. So kind of expect to be making this, but also think about what your own papers and how they justify their conclusion. Again, this is similar ideas, and this is just how people talk in reviews as well. So it's good to see these examples. But question. If you do have expertise, which you ideally do, if you're reviewing it, do feel free to question their conclusions, because worst case they can just come back and support it. It's not, but lay out your reasoning, because they need to be able to rebut that. If you have that comment, then someone else probably has that comment as well, and so they need to be able to support their arguments. There's chat popping off. I tried to open the chat, but I can't see what it says. Is there anything important in the chat?
No, it's just a cartoon I found on Twitter about before and after peer review and revision.
Nice. I presume it's saying it it's a lot better after.
It's funny because it's saying kind of the opposite. So on the top, it shows just a car, just a normal car before peer review, and after peer review, you have a laser on top of the car. The car is now turned into a limo. It has more tires, and it's just a whole bunch of extra stuff that's added onto it.
Yeah, so ideally we want to be going from a car that's a bit run down, goes to the garage and actually turns into a normal car. Yeah. But sometimes these peer reviews take your car from a normal car to
a James Bond car or something.
It's all about understanding the key ideas that they were trying to communicate and that they are trying to test, and their questions, and seeing if their work supports that. Your questions might be interesting, you can mention them, but other people's papers don't need to answer your questions just for the sake of it. So the other thing as well that's actually really important, so I'm glad that we managed to come back to this, is you can request things to be open access. So an example in the SARS-CoV paper was asking for the sequencing data to be made available, and in the review that I worked on with Jake, and we asked for the code to be on GitHub. So they were saying this code is available on request, but we all know that that no one can guarantee that, right? Whereas if you make them have a GitHub straight up, then it's there, at least whatever version they put up, at least something is there. It's especially important these days when, we're trying to make science better. So if you put your ideas out there, like your work can be used and utilized, especially if you're like suggesting a method or some software or a model. Like, it's not that useful if other people can't use it. Like, we shouldn't be trying to keep science to ourselves, basically. These are examples of what minor correction comments might look like. You can see here some like line ideas. Grammar is fine to check with them, like ask them to explain things, ask them to relabel things, etc. And then here we come on to like examples of people who haven't read the paper properly or just clearly haven't really like read it. We said about like an entire review being, if it's great and it is great and you can't say anything wrong with it, fine. But this review, this first Twitter here, like the entire review this was an interesting experiment despite null results. I mean, like, that's just lazy. So if you don't have time, don't agree to do it. And then the second example is like where they've misread something and they've just rejected it based on that. So, you have a lot of power as a reviewer. Like, you should respect that and like do your job properly, kind of thing. Don't be rude. These are comments that are from like a kind of site that's like, oh, these are things that have been said. So obviously we can't really reference these. But yeah, none of these are good review comments. Don't tell the person they should look at a career outside of science. Most people are trying, and if it's a bad review, if it's a bad paper, just say it's a bad paper and you don't think it should be. You think there's a lot that would need to be done. Like, you don't need to say, this is an insult to science or whatever you've decided, because there might be someone that's worked hard on the end of that, even if it's not great. We should be kind to each other in science if we can.
This is unbelievable. Where did you get these? These are awful.
So I can send the site that I got them from, but these, I don't know like how many of them have definitely happened, but like I definitely think, for example, like transphobia, especially the first one, I can imagine that being said, and there's some really bad journals and bad papers out there around gender studies, so I just think it's a bit toxic. But yeah, I don't think these aren't, these are kind of the things that have been collected over a while. I think things are improving because Twitter is there and people can be called out and there's more transparency. But don't be these people.
It should be the editor's job to filter out these two. Like, these are toxic comments, and if I was the editor, I wouldn't even.
Yeah, hopefully.
I would not give the authors these comments back. I would just try to find a new reviewer. Yeah,
if you're in that situation, do that. These are so damaging. Like, yeah, you might think, oh, well, I could, remove it or whatever. But like, the scientists and researchers, we're always working hard, and maybe not everyone has, they shouldn't have to have like really thick skin and, whatever. All of these have an impact. What you say has an impact. So yeah, if anyone's in an editor position later on, make sure these things don't get through either. So this is something that some PIs stop their students publishing because it doesn't agree with what they think. But yeah, this doctor had a thread of this, but basically there was just comments that it doesn't agree with, published science. That doesn't mean it's not right. Like, suggest what they can do to help support their results. If they are showing this new result, like, it's important not to just reject something because it doesn't agree with what you think, especially, well, anywhere really. As scientists, we should be questioning the world, and preconceived notions aren't a reason to reject a paper. They might need more effort to support their ideas, but to go against the grain, but we shouldn't be rejecting them because of try not to ask for more experiments too late in the process. It's very frustrating for people. Like you can suggest it, but try and suggest like other ways to make the work publishable as well. Maybe they need to just focus on this part if they want to publish it as it is. Like there's limited funding and limited time in science, and we have to respect that. And we have to like work out what's essential and what's not when we're reviewing papers. And again, think about their questions and how to answer those well, rather than maybe your ones, which might require more work. There's just read the paper properly, but if you are asking for something, try and make sure you checked for it first. As I say, reviews should be a multiple read thing. They shouldn't just be a first pass comment, because they hugely affect what happens to the paper in the end. If your comments are very critical or like seem like they've omitted something obvious when they haven't, like that can be an automatic rejection. But they may not have the chance to redo the comments if the editor decides, there's too many things on this, so just get it right. I think, we'll make mistakes, but it should be something you don't just casually kind of comment on. And this is what I was saying about the reviewers, like, like if there's a piece of work that's yours and you want reviewing, like mention it specifically, like mention the specific things that's relevant. If it's not relevant, don't ask for your work to be referenced, and also suggest other people as well, like other work as well that might show the same thing. So Nature journals, their papers have the peer-reviewed documents at the bottom. That's the guide that I linked before. And there's also like some podcasts out there I came across. This minor revisions one when I was on it, but it's kind of fun that people, scientists, other disciplines will out there discussing these things regularly about the system and how we play in it. So thank you very much.